They can take your name, strip it from your mouth, twist it into a weapon. They can distort your silence into guilt, turn your stillness into suspicion, make your kindness look like weakness. That's how the world works, not through violence, God, but through narrative. And if you're not careful, you become their story. Character in someone else's script. But what happens when they meet a mind that doesn't yield? What happens when their words no longer rewrite your truth, and the noise outside cannot enter the citadel within? What happens when you become unshakable? Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear not to deceive, but to survive. It begins as protection. Then it becomes performance. And eventually, we forget the face beneath the mask, because truth is dangerous in the world of the herd. And as Nietzsche warned, the herd fears the individual, because he reminds them they have surrendered their own will. So we trade authenticity for approval, silence the parts of ourselves that don't fit, until even we can't hear them anymore. They taught you to manage your image, but never to understand your soul. They praised your compliance, but punished your inwardness. They told you not to feel too deeply, not to question too much, not to be too much, so you dimmed your fire, called it maturity. But you knew, deep in your marrow, this wasn't strength. This was decay. Schopenhauer said that life is suffering, but not all suffering is equal. Some suffering weakens us, their suffering wakes us. And the moment you refuse to betray yourself again, the crucifixion begins. You don't escape the world, you outgrow it. You burn every mask. You bury every borrowed belief. You mourn every version of you that never lived, and you descend, not into madness, but into truth. Kierkegaard called this despair, the sickness of a self that cannot bear its own falseness. But he also said, despair is not the end, it is the beginning. Of inwardness, what if mastering your mind was never about silencing thoughts, but confronting the chaos beneath them? What if clarity was not the absence of conflict, but the ability to remain still within it? Alan Watts said, the self is an illusion, a pattern of thought mistaking itself for the thinker. But when you stare long enough into that illusion, you find something deeper, not a fixed identity, but a silent witness, and that they can't touch. You become dangerous the moment you no longer seek to be understood. The moment your truth becomes your home, not your currency. You become powerful. The moment you stop performing and start being. This is the journey of a mind they cannot break, not built in comfort, but in crucifixion. It's not defined by domination, but by depth. They wanted obedience, chose self-possession. They wanted reaction. You chose stillness. And now, they panic. Not because you are loud, but because you are free. You don't escape the world. You outgrow it. We are born into patterns, into names not chosen, into roles written before we could speak. From the very first breath, the script is handed to us. Be good. Be normal. Be acceptable. We learn how to smile when it hurts. We learn how to nod when we disagree. We learn how to vanish, standing in plain sight. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear not to lie, but to survive. The world rewards the mask. It applauds the agreeable, the predictable, the tame. But every mask is a tomb, a quiet death of something real. And most live and die this way, silent, performing numb. But sometimes, in the hush between distractions, in that fragile hour before sleep, a crack appears. Just a whisper, just a breath, quiet rebellion of the soul. Visual, a man sits alone on a bus. He stares out the window. The city blurs past him, vibrant and meaningless. He doesn't blink. He doesn't smile. Inside, something is stirring. Question. Unwelcome, inconvenient, but persistent. Who am I, really? And then a sharper one follows. Who told me who I should be? Nietzsche warned us of the herd, that comfortable graveyard of souls, where freedom is traded for safety, where thought is replaced by consensus, where the individual forgets that he is not the crowd. They say conformity is peace, but it's not. It's anesthesia, and somewhere deep in your bones, you feel it. You are not made for obedience. You are not made for silence. You are not born to be a cog in a machine, but a fire in a frozen world. Schopenhauer once said, "Most men are not free. They are merely slaves of appearances. We imitate, we perform, we distract ourselves endlessly, not from boredom, but from ourselves. Because to look inward, to really look, means meeting what you've buried. Every repressed desire, every denied truth, every forgotten dream." Jung called it the shadow, the self you were taught to silence. And when the mirror breaks, it returns not to haunt you, but to invite you. Most want to move forward, to heal, to grow, to feel better. But sometimes there is no path forward, only downward. Not down into despair, but into depth. Kierkegaard spoke of despair not as an end, but as a beginning. A signal that the surface self can no longer contain the truth. This is the moment of awakening, not through enlightenment, but through collapse. Nietzsche said, "If you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you." But what he didn't say is that the abyss is not your enemy. It is your reflection, stripped of story, stripped of performance, stripped of fear. Here there is no applause, no approval, only awareness. And within that silence, you meet the first real version of yourself. This is where it begins. Not in success, not in status, not in safety, but in the quiet revolt of an honest breath, a self remembered, a lie unlearned, a life reclaimed. The mirror must break. For the self to wake, to master your mind, you must first be willing to lose it. Not in madness, but in descent. Not in escape, but in surrender. The world taught you to rise, to keep moving upward, toward clarity, achievement, control. But there is a truth buried beneath the surface, a doorway that doesn't open with striving, but with stillness. And when it creaks open, what you find is not light, but noise. This is the underworld of your own psyche, a realm beyond logic, beyond story, where the boundaries between self and shadow blur, where the monsters don't chase you, because they are you. Carl Jung called this place the domain of the shadow, the hidden twin of your conscious self, made not of evil, but of everything you were taught to suppress: your rage, your grief, your guilt, your lust, your fear, the instincts shamed, the feelings dismissed, the memories exiled. You begin to hear them, the voices you silenced. You remember the shame you swallowed in front of watching eyes, the love you betrayed to protect your pride, the humiliation that left a wound where your voice used to be. And in the cold stillness of the abyss, you see something terrifying, your face reflected in the very things you spent your life avoiding. Kierkegaard once wrote that despair is not the loss of hope, but the refusal to become oneself. And here, in this darkness, you meet that refusal face to face. This is not suffering imposed by the world. This is suffering you've carried like a second skin, invisible, but suffocating. This is not punishment. This is reckoning. Schopenhauer saw life as suffering because he understood the torment of desire without end, the restless craving to escape, to numb, to forget. But here there is no escape. There is only this moment, this place, this trembling now. And if you resist it, you break. But if you stay, something unexpected begins to happen. The noise doesn't fade. You learn to hear through it. Alan Watts said, "You are not the thinker. You are the awareness of thought." And that's the paradox. You descended into chaos not to fight it, but to understand it, and understanding is liberation. The abyss doesn't consume you, it reflects you. And Nietzsche was right. If you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. But what he didn't say is that the abyss doesn't glare. It doesn't judge, it simply waits, to be seen, to be named, to be integrated. This is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of the individuation Jung spoke of. The reintegration of all your parts, light and shadow, fear and fire, chaos and clarity. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be whole. And wholeness requires descent, because no mind becomes unbreakable by avoiding its fracture. You went down, not to escape the world, but to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You do not rise by denial. You descend with honesty. You do not master the mind by taming it. You master it by meeting its depths and making peace with the dark. The abyss is not your enemy. It is your reflection, waiting to be understood. Descent is not death. It is the beginning of return. This is the turning point, not marked by applause, but by silence, not by triumph, but by confrontation. Most people flee here. They distract. They blame. They numb. It's anything to avoid meeting the war that lives inside them. But a rare few step forward, not with weapons, but with awareness, not to conquer the world, but to confront themselves. This is not a war against the world. This is a war within, between who you are and who you were told to be. The echoes of parents, teachers, lovers, all speaking through your thoughts, wearing your voice. Yang wrote that individuation is not becoming someone new, but becoming who you truly are beneath the noise. But to do that, you must let go of everything that isn't yours. Let it all burn, the stories, the labels, the inherited scripts. Let the false self collapse under its own weight, because to build a mind they can't break, you must first allow the one they built for you to die. Kierkegaard taught us that despair is not the absence of hope, but the refusal to be one's true self. So, choose, even if it costs you comfort, even if it means walking alone. Because freedom has always been an inside job. Carl Jung warned, that which we deny within returns not as fate, but as shadow. The parts of you you rejected, they didn't disappear, they waited. And now they've returned, not to destroy you, but to be seen, to be reclaimed, to be reintegrated. This is how the fragments become whole, not by force, but by truth, not by control, but by conscious acceptance. You're under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. Visual. The figures stand slowly. Their gaze is clear now, not empty, but emptied of illusion, narration. So, tear it all down. What? The narratives that no longer serve, the roles that feel like cages, personas that demanded your soul in exchange for safety. You are not here to be palatable. You are not here to be predictable. You are here to be whole, and wholeness demands revolution. Machiavelli understood a secret the world fears. Power begins within, not in manipulation, not in deception, but in clarity. The most dangerous person is the one who governs their own mind, not cruelly, but consciously. They are not immune to fear. They have befriended it. They are not unscarred. They are unshaken. This is the birth of inner sovereignty. You no longer obey every thought. You observe. You no longer chase approval. You embody truth. You are no longer a subject of circumstance. You are the architect of meaning, not detached from life, but deeply embedded within it, with eyes wide open, with nothing to prove, and nothing left to fear. You are not here to be ruled by noise, by the herd, by your history. You are here to remember. The mind is a temple, and you are its keeper. Tear down what is false, crown what is true. There comes a moment, not marked by trumpets or revelation, but by a breath, single breath. So quiet, you almost miss it. It doesn't demand. It simply is. The world is still burning, but you are not. You have survived the noise, the endless static of self-doubt, screaming chaos of shoulds and shouldn'ts, that inner war between persona and shadow, between who you've been and who you're becoming. And now, the chaos has not ended, but it has softened, because you have changed your relationship to it. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." Suffering persists, but now, you stop trying to outrun it. This is the silence beyond chaos, not the silence of numbness, but the silence of understanding. It is not passive, it is not weak. It is the silence of the mountain, unmoved by the wind, yet touched by every gust. You begin to notice what you never saw before. You watch your thoughts pass, like clouds. No longer chase them, nor try to stop them. Let them come, and you let them go. You see how your fears wear costumes, how your ego tightens its grip each time you're seen, how every reaction is a ghost from the past, begging to be acknowledged. You don't resist anymore. You observe, with compassion, but without illusion. Alan Watts was right. The mind grows silent, not by suppression, but by understanding. You stop fighting your own reflection. You stop arguing with life. Stop needing everything to make sense. Stop measuring your worth by the reactions of others. Stop contorting yourself into masks that never fit. This is not surrender. This is clarity. You begin to walk differently. Not to arrive somewhere, but to feel your own footsteps. To notice that even the ground beneath you changes depending on how you carry your weight. And in this slowness, something unexpected rises. Freedom. Not freedom from pain, but freedom within it. The kind of freedom Kierkegaard whispered about, the paradox of despair becoming your doorway to inwardness. The realization that truth is not found in answers, but in the courage to ask better questions. What is strength? Not armor, not control, not loudness. Strength is the man who can sit with his suffering and not flinch. The woman who holds her brokenness like a fragile bird, not to fix it, but to understand it. The soul that says, I will not run anymore. In this silence there is a kind of music, a rhythm you never heard before, because you were too busy screaming. The ticking of time becomes less urgent, yet the hunger for approval less sharp. The ache for perfection begins to loosen. And what is left? Presence, not manufactured, not rehearsed, just presence. The world still moves. People still shout. The chaos still circles. But you have become a mountain, a still point in a turning world. It's not because you conquered the storm, but because you stopped being at war with it. This is the beginning of sovereignty. It's not ruling others, but no longer being ruled by yourself. The mask has melted, the persona has bowed, and the shadow is no longer your enemy. It is your teacher. This is the silence that cannot be broken. Not because the world is quiet, but because you have become whole. The war is not over, but now you do not fear it, because the battlefield is no longer outside you. It is you, and you are learning to walk through it, unafraid. The forge is quiet now, but the iron still glows, molten, shaped not by force, but by fire that didn't consume, only transformed. A figure stands at the edge of a forgotten city. Smoke clings to the cloak draped over his shoulders. His eyes don't burn. They hold the silence of stars, not cold, just eternal. This is the one who went into the forest alone, dragging the weight of 1,000 borrowed masks. Now he walks upright, not because he won, but because he surrendered everything that wasn't his to carry. The return is not a celebration. It is a resurrection. You step back into the world, but the world no longer recognizes you. The noise remains. The endless barking of the herd, the desperate clamor of approval, of applause, of affirmation. But you do not flinch. You no longer drink from their fountains. You've tasted the water that flows beneath the mountain, the silent, bitter spring of inward truth. They ask, what happened to you? But you say nothing. Because transformation is not explained. It is embodied. Your posture tells the story. Your gaze, steady and unreactive, tells the world, I have faced myself, and I did not run. You've returned, but not to join them. You return as a silent witness of what lies beyond the veil. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the becoming of the self. But this becoming is not linear. It is circular. You leave society. You break. You descend. You confront the abyss. And only then, only after walking naked through the underworld of your psyche, do you rise. But when you rise, you do not become what they wanted. You become what you are. This is not rebellion. It is revelation. In the square, people argue about truth. They debate, they scream, they posture, you observe. It's like a blacksmith watching children swing wooden swords. You no longer need to win. You no longer need to correct. You've forged your blade, not to attack, but to be. Your very presence becomes a weapon against illusion. Like the Burmensch, you are no tyrant. You are not here to dominate. You are here because you dared to transcend what they told you was all there was. They worship comfort. You endured despair. They chase purpose. You became purpose. Schopenhauer once said, a man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. But you smile, not in contradiction, but in quiet agreement, because now you no longer fight your will. You no longer manipulate your mind like an enemy. You watch it. It's like a storm across a valley, a candle flickering in a room full of ghosts. You are no longer a slave to thought. You are the one who watches thought, thinking. This detachment is not numbness. It is clarity. You walk past the old temples, the ones where you once prayed to gods of image, of identity, of recognition. Now, you bow to none, not because you are arrogant, but because you have bowed to pain, and found that even it cannot hold you. This is what Kierkegaard called the paradox, that only through despair do we awaken to spirit, only by losing all meaning do we become the creators of it. You do not seek peace now, you carry it, not like a prize, like a compass. Your boundaries are not walls, they are signals. A flame around your being that says, "This is mine, and I do not owe you entry." The ones who cannot see it call you selfish, but they do not understand. You are no longer here to bleed for those who want, even bandage their own wounds. The world wants your compliance, but you give them something more dangerous, your stillness. Alan Watts once said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." And now you know. You are not a label. You are not your name. You are not even the story you've told yourself in the dark. You are the witness. It's the steady eye behind the flicker of thought, the quiet hum beneath all identities. You've returned to the city, but the city no longer lives in you. You no longer try to win their game. You've left the board entirely. You live by your own code now, one carved not in stone, but in scars. And in that code, one rule echoes above all. Never betray yourself. You will lose people. You will lose praise. You will lose the illusion of being understood. But you will gain something the world cannot name, and therefore cannot take: sovereignty. And that is the real return. Not a return to the herd, but a return to the self, the one that was waiting beneath the rubble. Beneath the shame, beneath the 1,000 borrowed lives you were told to wear, you are no longer becoming, you are. And in a world addicted to the performance of being, that is the most radical act of all. Fade in. A single candle flickers in the middle of a darkened room. The flame does not fight the darkness. It simply glows. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg to be seen. It just is. And that is enough. A ripple begins to spread in still water, slow, elegant, born from nothing more than a falling leaf. This is how the true self enters the world, quietly, without applause, without permission. You've walked through the fire. You've stood barefoot in the storm. And now, in the hush that follows agony, you awaken, not with a roar, but with a breath, eyes open in close-up, not wide with fear, but calm, steady, human. You no longer seek validation because you've seen the cost. You watched yourself shapeshift for love, shrink for approval, twist your truth into palatable lies. But that mask grew heavy. The persona, as Jung warned, became a prison. You smiled while dying inside. You performed while your soul screamed backstage, and one day the act could no longer hold. That was the beginning. In a world obsessed with noise, stillness is rebellion. It doesn't conform, it doesn't impress, it simply exists. You sat with your pain, as Schopenhauer prescribed, not to escape it, but to understand it. You learned that silence is not absence, it is presence. Deepened. You crossed the despair Kierkegaard described, that terrifying abyss between what you are and what you long to become. But you didn't fall, you floated. Because when you gave up on controlling the chaos, you became part of it. You are no longer at war with life. You are life. You move with it. See how your feet touch the ground differently now? Not rushing, not retreating, just being. You listen deeper, not to reply, but to hear. Even your silence speaks now. It unnerves those who mistake noise for wisdom. Because when you stopped reacting, they lost their power. You no longer argue with shadows. You no longer chase the illusion of being enough. You are not chasing peace. You carry it, like a lantern through fog, not as a weapon, but as a witness. This is mastery. Once warned that if you gaze too long into the abyss will gaze back into you. But you let it. What stared back wasn't a monster. It was you, not the persona, not the performance, the raw, trembling, luminous being beneath it all. That is the Bermensch. It's not a tyrant, but a transcender. The one who dares to live by an inner code, even when the world demands conformity. You have become a soul they cannot domesticate. Look around. People are still shouting, still selling themselves for likes, still sprinting to work emptiness in the name of ambition. But you've slowed down. It's not because you're weak, but because you are finally strong enough to wait. To breathe before speaking, to respond instead of react, to live by design, not default. You don't need to control others, because you've mastered yourself, not through suppression, but through understanding. Not with coldness, but with clarity. Alan Watts once said that the mind grows silent not by force, but by understanding. And now you understand. You no longer fight the river, you've become the current. You don't reject your past, you integrate it. You've carried your shadow like a wounded child. You've sat with your fears like old friends. You've honored the paradoxes, the contradictions, the unbearable truths. And now you're free. Not from life, but within it. This is what they fear, not your anger, not your rebellion, but your peace. Because they cannot control what they do not understand. And they do not understand a person who no longer needs their approval. The candle still burns. But now the whole room is illuminated. Not because the darkness vanished, but because you finally stopped hiding from it. This is the rarest thing in existence. A free mind. One that doesn't belong to the herd. One that has passed through suffering, despair, and illusion, and emerged not bitter, but awake. This is the silent revolution. The revolution of one. And in the silence, only the sound of your own breath remains. Not trembling, not hiding, not asking. Just free.